Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are today. Welcome to decodeTV's webinar, Video Highway, CDNs, and the Future of Video Delivery. I'm Stuart Thomson. I'm Editorial Director of decodeTV. So regarding video services, we obviously live in the age of streaming, and increasingly that means mass-scale live streaming too. And as streaming supplants broadcast technology, CDNs have become central to the delivery of video. Video streaming means choosing one or more CDNs to deliver content to end users efficiently with high quality, low latency, and at scale. In the case of big live events, which is an increasingly common use case, making the right choices is even more crucial. So what do content service providers need to look at? What are the challenges in delivery and what technology developments can help? Here to discuss some of this, I'm joined by Stelios Kotakis, who's Research Director at Caretta Research, and Will Law, Chief Architect at Akamai's Cloud Technology Group. Stelios has more than 10 years' experience in analyzing and consulting on video tech, video transmission, media managed services, and even drones for leading media, telco, and tech companies. He's a market modeling expert, and he's often cited by news outlets, including the BBC, CNET, and others. Will is described as a veteran media delivery technologist, currently focused on low latency streaming, media for quick, web transport, Dash, and CMCD. And he co-chairs some key industry groups and has a background in engineering and media startups. Before we begin, I'd like to just say that we welcome your questions. If you have a question, please post it using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll endeavour to answer questions at the end of the session, so please stay with us for that. So just to kick off, I'd like to just ask both of you what you think the key things are that content service providers need to think about at a high level in choosing a CDN provider. Stelios, maybe you could start with that.
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. So I would say they should focus in four main areas. So one is performance and reach. So if the provider of the CDN has points of presence in specific regions where the audience is based mainly or concentrated, and they need to look at real world performance data. So not just what they claim in the marketing outage. And then regarding security, I would say a good CDN should offer some robust DDoS protection and a web application firewall, the WAF as we know, as standard. And then you have the cost and scalability. So understand the pricing model, what is it based on, bandwidth, requests, and ensure that it can handle the sudden traffic spikes, especially when it comes to larger service providers with large audiences. And finally, I would say, and that's very important that some people forget to do, is the features and support. So you need to look for capabilities that match your content, that match your size as a service provider. If you do video streaming, you need to look also for advanced support for media and ensure that you have a very responsive technical support.
Great. And Will, what would you add to that list?
Yeah, that's a great list. So I'll just address some of the items on it. People should list all those items. The one most people make a decision on is cost alone. Like CDN streaming has become a commodity business. People ask, what's your price per gigabyte? And then they see the lowest number and they sign a contract. And as Stelios made clear, that's really not the end of the game. It's a far more nuanced decision than that. He spoke about capacity. When someone says, "Oh, I can do a terabit in Greece," well, can they do it in the outlying towns or only in Athens? And can they do it at 8 p.m. at night when it's prime time and it's congested? Or can they only do it at 2 o'clock in the morning when no one's using the network? And can they do it when there's a soccer game on at the same time? So capacity has many different dimensions to it. It's not a single number. Reliability is another interesting aspect. If a CDN tells you they're 99.99% reliable, you should not be impressed, because that means they can go down 40-something minutes a month and they're still within that SLA. And 40 minutes a month, if you're an OTT provider or any sort of business, that's very detrimental to your business. So I encourage people, look beyond cost, look into capacity technology. We mentioned security. How good are they at a CDN wants to give content to the good people, but it also wants to block the bad people. So how good are they at VPN detection, at geo-blocking, at piracy detection? Those are all attributes of protecting a delivery surface as well as simply egressing content.
Right. So just leading on from that, the CDN, I mean, it sounds from both of you, the role of the CDN in ensuring in security is one of the key kind of added value parts of the CDN offering.
Well, it's like the defense shield, right? It's the part of the delivery chain that the end users touch first, right? And the part of the goal of a CDN is to protect your origin infrastructure. It's a shield, and it's a shield not only for load and capacity, but it's a shield for malware and attempts to steal or pirate the content. So because it's that outermost layer, it serves dual functions.
Yep, great. Now, you both mentioned cost there, and Will, you particularly cautioned against thinking about cost as the sole determinant of the choices you make. But how can content providers best try and balance those two things? So you're looking at quality of experience, but you also want to optimize the cost of delivery. What's the kind of balance there? And Will, maybe you can kick off with that
So
since you brought it up.
there's an obvious component that actually decides the ratio between QoE and how many bits you send across the wire, which is your cost of delivery, and that's your codec. So assuming the bulk of your delivery is video, which is probably what it is for a live event, then switching to a better codec is your most obvious way to increase your QoE while optimizing, and in this case, minimizing your cost of delivery. And that's easier said than done. I'd say 60 to 80% of all traffic today is still H.264, which is a 23-year-old codec at this point, and the patents are about to expire. And people continue using that because it had a clear patent portfolio, but more importantly, because it's highly reliable. It works on all devices. So the challenge comes in rolling out new codecs is not all devices support the newer codecs, even though they offer a very clear path to minimizing costs or raising the quality of the experience. So you need to look carefully. But I would say here in 2025, HEVC should certainly be on the table for everybody. I see it being robustly supported across more than 90% of commonly used devices today. So your challenge as a content distributor is which 10% don't support it, right? And one solution for that is just AVC everywhere. But I think the more intelligent solution today is certainly HEVC at a minimum where it can be supported, AVC for the rest. And then you start looking at AV1, which is certainly coming up in terms of device support.
Right. So the codec is the best way to get the cost down and look at the.
It's one of the ways, right? Another way is tuning your bitrate ladders. A lot of people, they pick a bitrate ladder in January. They ignore the type of devices, the networks it's going through, they encode their entire library to this bitrate ladder, and that's it for the rest of the year. And it could be that none of the internal bitrates are being used, or that the top one is never used on certain mobile providers because you can't get enough traffic. So what people should really do is get away from static ladders and move towards a dynamic solution. Bring in metadata about real-time data about who your audience is, what type of devices, where are they located, and what's their capacity to receive certain bit rates. And then adjust your ladder selection to basically, you want to minimize the content while maximizing QoE. And there's a lot of strategies for doing that amongst all the encoding vendors. And the real takeaway lesson is keep it dynamic as you can, and don't make a static solution at the start of the year that is perpetuated for the next 12 months.
Got it. Stelios, would you add anything to what Will said on cost
Yeah,
versus
I
cost?
had exactly this in mind. So the first is you need a balance between the performance and efficiency, really. You need to find the golden spot, as I like to say. And then you start by optimizing your content, as Will mentioned. So you use compression, modern formats to reduce the file sizes, which lowers the bandwidth costs. But then you can leverage your CDN features. As Will mentioned, it needs to be dynamic. So you need the adaptive bitrate streaming in reality, the ABR. A lot of CDNs are offering these features. When you can adjust your video quality based on the user's network conditions and ensure a smooth performance and playback. But I think also very crucial is to maximize the cache hit ratio. So, by ensuring that more content is served from the CDN's edge instead of the origin server, you can reduce the latency for users and at the same time cut your own server costs. So the fine tuning of caching rules, using custom keys can significantly improve this.
Right. Okay. I mean, we'll touch a bit on edge caching later in the discussion too. So let's talk a little bit about live events. Live is obviously one of the bigger challenges when it comes to streaming, and there have been cases of things going wrong or slightly wrong or wrong in a big way. What are the main challenges with live events that you see, and what needs to be in place to ensure that scalability, and particularly to manage those peaks in traffic that can come up when, unpredictably perhaps when a game's in motion? Will, do you want to kick off with that?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, for live events, caching is not one of the biggest problems. And the reason is, for a live event, there's very little content you want to cache. Every player, ideally, is requesting the same segment at the same time. So the cache hit rate that Stelios has talked about is going to be very high because there's not a high cardinality of content. All the players are asking for the same segment. So we're going to have them cached. The bigger problem is matching egress capacity to your link capacity within an ISP. So you've got to get across the last mile to get to the end user's device. And your server can maybe output 50 gigabits per second quite easily of content. But can that 50 gigabits per second move over prepared links and reach the eyeballs? That is the challenge. And people think it just happens automatically. It really doesn't. For large live events, there's a team of people who are well ahead of the event. They're trying to predict the demand that's going to happen. And based upon that prediction, they will then start mapping the egress capacity with on-net and maybe off-net to the links that are there, and very carefully mapping them. And this takes time. It's not something you can do in the middle of a live event. Live events have been described to me as car crashes, right? You prepare your best before they happen, but when you're in the middle of a car crash and you're rolling around, it's just trying to stay alive, right? And if you've been in a live event that's going wrong or south, it's very, very difficult to recover. You need you have to prepare your recovery process well before you get in. And part of that is demand prediction and mapping capacity to links. And when we see live events failing, it's usually the fault of one of those two. Like, you're trying to deliver content through a congested link and it's not working. The other one that people don't realize is common points of failure are not the delivery at all. It will be your authentication system, people signing on. You test it with 10,000 requests per second, and then you get 100,000 requests per second during the game or just before the game. And live sports events are the worst because everybody joins within a few minutes of the start. And so you get a huge demand increase in a very short period of time. And unless you've been able to test all your DRM system, your license issuing, your user authentication, your logo generation or custom sport, all of that has to be tested at scale before you actually reach the live event.
Right. So it's not just about the video delivery piece, it's about everything else that goes along with it. And Stelios, so do you agree with that? I mean, you've got to, it's really all about the planning before that car crash happens and the airbags explode out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard to sometimes predict those spikes and understand the volume of them. Really, that's why you need a CDN that has a very good proven track record in reality in handling these situations, because this is where past experience kind of reassures that everything is going to go smoothly in reality. But your main, let's say, enemies in a live event are latency. So you don't want any latency to your viewers in reality. So you want to avoid this, and you need to ensure scalability for those sudden spikes. So again, adapting bitrate streaming, so ABR, is non-negotiable to handle the varying network conditions also among viewers. But also, I would say implementing a load balancing across multiple servers or even multiple CDNs is crucial to distribute the traffic load and prevent, any single point of failure or outage that might ruin your stream.
Right. Well, do you see latency looming large and the concerns people have, the old chestnut about people cheering next door before you see the
Yeah,
growth?
that's such a tired cliche. Let's not repeat it on this one, right? We know it's there. Latency is very interesting. So we did a lot of work within the last 6 years to lower latency. Low latency dash, low latency HLS came out about 4 years ago. Who's using them today at scale? Very, very few people. Like there's little proofs of concept around, but even Apple, the inventor of low latency HLS, does not offer their primary events in low latency. And I hope that situation is going to change this year, but up to date they haven't, right? So, and why not? It's because latency is a curve that as you move down that curve, you increase your risk. Your player buffer is necessarily smaller than your latency, or conversely, your latency is at least your player buffer plus uh, some other delays in the network. So by lowering your buffer on your player, you have little chance to recover from perturbations in delivery or from problems that are like failover problems that occur. So it's a risk increase. And if people, the main driver of lower latency has been social media, which is people are tweeting that a goal or Xing that a goal has been scored uh, 10, 12 seconds before you see it on the video. So that's been the primary driver to reduce the latency. If you don't have a broadcast signal to compare to, the latency can be anything you like because the broadcaster defines the reality. But certainly matching broadcast television, which 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, depending where you are in the world and how you're getting it. That's a new target now that we're starting to see requests finally coming in to at least match broadcast and solve the neighbor problem. But then there's other new technologies that are coming out that can help us get a whole lot lower. And those are the ones that are exploited primarily or leveraged, I should say, where you need absolute lower latency, which is gambling, betting, gaming, and very low latency interactive solutions, maybe where there's chatting or people interacting in a common environment.
Right.
And,
So
and we see latency, obviously, that you're willing to take the risk because the business application demands it.
right. It's for those more for those specific cases, such as the gaming case, rather
Yeah.
than the live game is not quite as critical, I guess. Okay, great. All right. One of the topics that frequently comes up or has come up in conversations I've had is the need to have use multiple CDNs, to have sort of redundancy, to have you know, to ensure reliability, you need to use more than one CDN provider to ensure that the traffic is managed correctly. How do you see that? I mean, how important or not do you think it is to use multiple CDNs, particularly in the case of live traffic? Will, what about you? What's your take on this?
Yeah, you might think it's strange as CDNs saying you should use multiple CDNs, but the reality as an engineer, yes. So when you're trying to define it, you've got a system, which is a distribution system, and you want it to be highly reliable, right? You want your end users to get your content. And say that systems, you have one way of doing something and it's 99.9% reliable, just to use that figure. You can replace it by having two less reliable systems that are substitutes for one another. So if you get two of them, they can each be about 99% reliable, which means they can fail 1 out of 100 times. But together, on aggregate, you'll still get a system level reliability. And you can go down, if you do 4 CDNs, they only have to be 90% reliable, each of them. They fail 10 out of 100 times, and you'll still get that system level. So it's the mathematics of reliability. And that's why you want multiple providers to do the same thing. The flip side of that is it's easy to say I have 4 and that I switch over, but how do you implement the switch? And that turns out that's the challenge, right? If I just blindly allocate a quarter of my audience to each of 4 CDNs, then a quarter of them are going to have nothing while the other 3 are happy. And if I just allocate new sessions to the better performing CDNs, then they get pinned to a CDN, but then if it goes bad, they're stuck to it. So optimally, I want to be able to move people mid-session. In fact, I want to move them at every segment boundary, maybe, and make an optimum choice. But if I move them at every segment boundary to a CDN, they're going to get cold hits from one CDN and cold from another, so that hurts their performance. So there's a lot of science and art in how do you manage a multi-CDN scenario, and how do you intelligently and carefully move users to find the best CDN for them at that particular second of the live event.
Right. Stelios, from your perspective, are these the kind of challenges and solutions you would also identify with regard to multi-CDN?
Yeah, more or less, yes. So the one CDN is a single point of failure. You don't want that. You don't want an outage with that provider, that single provider. That means your live stream is going down. So using multiple CDNs provides redundancy and resilience in reality. So it's a safety clause, let's say. But as Will mentioned, the way you're doing the multi-CDN switching and the load balancing and everything is very important. It has to be dynamic. It has to be based on real-time data. It has to be based on the strengths of different CDNs, because I think we all know in this panel that different CDNs have different strengths in different geographic locations across the globe. So you need to make a mix of all that and use a tool that would help you identify the needs in real time and help you act quickly. So that's something very important when going for a multi-CDN strategy. But multi-CDN is a must when you want to stream major live events, especially.
Right. Now, one aspect of this that we hear quite a lot about recently is mixing private and public CDNs and deploying. We talked earlier about caching at the edge. Deploying deep caching within ISPs networks could be part of that. There may be pros and cons to this, and I'm sure you guys have a view on it. So maybe talk a little bit about how you see that evolving and what the pros and cons are of using ISP-based, putting infrastructure on ISPs and mixing private and public CDNs. Stelios, maybe you can start with them.
Yeah, of course. So there is a case for this hybrid approach between private and public CDNs. So a private CDN would offer a very good control and security for sensitive content or predictable traffic, and it would lead to long-term cost savings at high volumes. On the other hand, the public CDN provides massive global scale and is very cost effective in handling unexpected traffic spikes or when you're reaching a broad audience, let's say. I think the primary con of a private CDN is the significant upfront investment you have to do and the management overhead, especially if you are a larger, let's say, organization. Although in reality, and that's the funny thing in there, a funny twist, is that only if you're big enough you can afford your own private CDN. that's what history has revealed. Then you have the deep caching within the ISP networks, the open caching as we call it. So I think this has been around for quite some time. This has the benefit of delivering content from extremely close location to the end user, which is going to be in the edge of the ISP network provider, which is going to reduce the latency and improve the quality. It can also reduce the traffic load on the ISP network, and that's the benefit for the internet service providers. In reality, that's the main reason they're going for these solutions. The main challenge there is to establish partnerships with the ISPs and the complexity of deploying and managing this infrastructure, because having something in somebody else infrastructure and location, and he's the main, let's say, manager of all of this, but you have to also go and monitoring constantly the situation. So there is a mix, a complexity in that whole process. So, and I think that's one of the main reasons this hasn't, being adopted more and more by the industry so far.
Right. And Will, I know from conversations I've had with you that the complexity is one thing you've raised about this. I mean, what's your view of it?
Yeah, on the surface, it seems like a natural and good idea, right? Why not mix private and public? You get a greater delivery service, you get greater reliability, and you get price competition between the two. So as a content distributor, you can lower the price. The challenge, and Stelios has hinted to it, that firstly, the last mile is still a bottleneck. Doesn't matter how many caches you have in the network, whether they're private or public. The last mile is still the last mile for both those delivery systems, right? So just increasing, if your public CDN can already saturate the last mile going out to the users. Adding more private caches into that same network is not going to help those end users. That network is saturated already. So you got to make sure that it's going to work where your public CDNs can't saturate the network, and CDNs are built to have high egress, so that narrows the areas where it's going to work. The bigger problem is in coordination. Like, delivery is not simple. The CDN is doing many things when it's delivering content, right? It's modifying headers, it's executing prefetching strategies, it's running edge scripts, it's purging content across it. And as soon as you mix multiple providers, you have to make sure that you can coordinate all of those behaviors, and then you get consistent output from what is not a coordinated delivery system. And the only way to do that reliably is to lower the features. In other words, go to lowest common denominator. So if all you want to do is just deliver, make a GET request and deliver a response, yes, you can do that. But if you look at the delivery configs or how the properties are set up for actual live events, they're very sophisticated. They're moving content. They're having failover to alternate origins. They're taking different paths. They're using different maps. They're evaluating tokens on the fly. They're trying to detect piracy. How do you get a consistent behavior out of that across a loosely affiliated collection of vendors? That's the real challenge in that scenario.
Right. I mean, Stelios mentioned the open caching protocol. Is that something that can help with this, or is it not really something that goes far enough along the lines to resolve some of these issues?
Sorry, I didn't get the question, sir.
Stelios mentioned the open caching protocol. Is that something that goes
that I can't comment on. Akamai is not part of open caching, so I think maybe
Okay.
Stelios can comment, or someone in our audience can comment, but we don't integrate with it and we don't work on it. We have a hard enough time keeping our caching consistent and reliable, and we're deployed in 4,000 networks across the world. So we think we have the reach we want. Our goal is to keep the COGS low and keep the egress high.
Yeah, I guess one of the points you mentioned there was just managing the multiple infrastructures, and it's loose, and you end up with the lowest common denominator. I guess there's also a commercial challenge in managing multiple CDN relationships in multiple territories. It's just commercially very complex as well.
Yeah, I mentioned how many networks we're in, right? So we have a whole team of people who their whole year, they just manage network relationships. And because we're in so many, it's like we're the bulk buy. We can go off and get lower rates. If you come as an individual company, it's very expensive to match that type of deployment. You're making a bunch of legal agreements and having to buy colo space and negotiate barriers. And as Stelios mentioned, if you're Apple or Facebook, or Microsoft, you can do that because you can spend hundreds of millions building essentially a private CDN. But I think what we're talking about in this case is not those very large deployments, but rather open caching type scenarios. And I see Terry 48 posted a question. If public CDN is outside of ISP network and private is inside, this is a huge difference. I don't think that's the difference, Terry. I think the private network is actually one that might be offered by the ISP. And I think a lot of ISPs would like to offer a CDN service, and some of them do. So both of them are going to be inside that final network. But the coordination difficulties I mentioned earlier are still very much apparent.
Got it. Okay. So, I mean, we talked briefly about open caching. There are a bunch of standards that are sort of have been developed to assist with different elements of CDN, including multi-CDN. So, for example, we have content steering. We've got the CMCD and CMSD to provide data back to the network. What's your view of how relevant and or necessary those standards and specifications are to help with some of the challenges we've been talking about? How far do they go, and what perhaps needs to happen to move this along? Will, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I spend a large part of my working life working on those standards. So standards bring interop, and interop brings reliability. That's why we work on them. We prefer to deploy standards, and most people do. So let me address them individually. So content steering, this is the ability for a content distributor to steer large cohorts of players reliably between content sources or between CDNs. Private, public, doesn't matter. It can move them. Traditionally, players When players in HLS and Dash, you can give them failover options. If they can't get content from one CDN, they can go and get it from another. But how they fail over, when they fail over, how many times they retry, that was different in every single player. And it was very difficult to coordinate movement. But content steering, you connect every player to a third-party server, and the player, that server is issuing instructions to the players as to where to get their content from. So it's far more deterministic control. This is supported, Apple defined it, Dash also implemented it. Apple have just moved content steering to its own draft at IETF, so people should check that out. And we're starting to see vendors arriving now building quite sophisticated content steering solutions that can move content. But you should make sure that your content steering solution doesn't now become your single point of failure as you move people around trying to avoid single points of failure. So it's pretty new in its deployment, but it's one of the standards offering the most opportunity for reliably and intelligently moving players between content sources. CMCD is Common Media Client Data. That's a spec I chaired at CTA Wave. And in fact, I'm working on CMCD v2 right now, which I'm super excited about. CMCD is data that comes from media players. And as they're requesting content from CDN, they append key value data that's useful, that the CDN knows nothing about, but also that the content distributor wants to collect while the live event's going on. So it's a way to get visibility into what's the throughput the player's seeing, what bitrate is it playing. And you can get this by putting a custom analytics client in the player, beaconing out to a third party and then collecting the data. But it's much more convenient to collect it from the CDN logs that you're already getting back in real time. And it's simple, it has no cost to it, and it's been widely deployed in most media players today. So we've seen a big uptick in CMCD usage. And CMCD v2 is going to add in some new features. Not only can the data be sent to the CDN delivering the content, but you can replicate what you send to the CDN to some other data source. And more importantly, it doesn't have to be triggered by requesting a media object. There are a whole lot of other triggers. It might be time-based heartbeat or errors, or I've entered an ad or I've left an ad, and you can beacon that data out. And we think this is going to open up a whole lot of exciting areas for visibility into how live players are doing and VOD players at any one time. So that spec should hopefully come out before the end of this year, if all goes right. I don't want to make commitments. And CMSD is a spec came out 2 years ago. It's that same key value data, but moving in the opposite direction from a content origin up through a CDN to a player. And the use case we're seeing now coming out is basically media quality analysis. The content producer can decorate media segments with information about their visual quality, say a VMAF score or a SSIM score. And that data piggybacks its way in, and it can go to the CDN or it can go up to the player. And then you can get a timeline report of the actual visual quality each user is getting. And that's not a visibility level we've easily had before. And I'm quite excited about where that's going.
Great. Fantastic. That's a very good summary, I think, of where things are at with these standards. Stelios, anything to add to that? Or
yeah, it was a great summary. I would add something probably from a market perspective, mainly, to be honest, here. So I think standardization in general, wherever it's applied, it's opening up the deep pockets. So with standardization, my feeling is that you can make it, let's say, not that much appealing for larger players to build their own CDN. That's the reality. That's what I'm feeling. So I think standardization in general is good for the whole industry. It lets down all the barriers and gives much more opportunity and options to the final buyers. Specifically on content steering, it's very crucial for the multi-CDN strategies we were discussing before, because it's providing a standardized way to dynamically switch a user between CDNs midstream and to optimize performance or avoid the outages. And then the CMCD and the CMSD, they both create a common language, let's say, for the players and servers to share real-time quality of experience data, buffering, bitrate, etc. I think we'll describe it very nice in very good detail. And this data is vital for making intelligent traffic routing decisions. And finally, open caching, the standardization of it, it's going to make the process of placing the caches into the high-speed network easier, but so it's going to reduce the complexity. But I don't think it's the crucial point for the wider industry to adopt the open caching standard, really.
Okay, great. And I guess one thing that came up when I was discussing content steering before was whether it could or should also be applied not only to ensuring quality in multi-CDN but cost optimization. Presumably, Will, you think it's better as a quality of service way of ensuring quality of service rather than lowering the costs?
You can lower cost, that's fine. It's really about the intelligent mix, right? If you've got
Yeah.
multiple CDNs and you might want to switch them based on performance at a certain time of day, you might want to switch them based on contractual commits. People have to deliver so much content through each CDN, or you might want to switch them based on cost. One CDN might be more expensive in prime time because they're a higher performing CDN. So you would switch to them during prime time and then switch away at other non-prime time to save money. So people definitely view content steering as a way for cost management. But you got to be careful. You can't sacrifice. If cost is the only metric you're optimizing, your quality is going to be thrown under the bus, and that's never good.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I think the one of the last major topics I wanted to look at in this is the way that video workflows are now migrating to the cloud and how that might impact on CDN choices. What do content providers need to think about, and what needs to be in place to ensure that everything works smoothly when you migrate your video workflows to the cloud in whole or in part? Will, is that something you could maybe address
Yeah,
first?
it dramatically changes CDN choice, to be honest. And that's because compute providers have their own CDN. So AWS specifically has CloudFront. And if you do make a large enough deal with AWS for compute, they're going to make very attractive rates for you to use CloudFront and essentially bind you into not a walled garden, but an economically incentivized garden so that it's more expensive for you to go out. And they do that with high egress fees. In other words, the penalty, they tax you if your data leaves their vertically integrated system. So a lot of people make the choice to just use AWS and CloudFront, and it's economically efficient and it works, but is it the best performance solution? What are you giving up in doing that? You're certainly winning on the economics, but are you perhaps losing in other dimensions? Akamai also has compute, and we have a CDN, so the two of them work well together. We try to keep our egress fees very low because we see the penalty that is coming with AWS. So we're trying not to repeat that particular environment, but we also offer both compute and delivery. So I think content has to come from somewhere. There has to be an origin, and you have to look at the binding between that origin and your delivery surface. And it makes a lot of performance sense that if they're very well connected. So most CDNs will have direct connects to AWS and to other hyperscaler origins and vice versa. So you certainly want to, as you're picking your CDN, make sure that you're not bound to your origin, that you're very well connected to your origin, and in fact, you have a choice of CDN from that origin.
Right. Stelios, do you want to add anything on cloud?
Yeah, I think in general, there is a rule that you have to align your cloud strategy with your CDN strategy. And as we know, the migration to the cloud, everybody expected it to be going at a faster pace, the last 10 years at least, but it hasn't. And I think one of the reasons is that it's really hard to combine effectively and efficiently, and in a low cost way, everything in your workflow that could be on premises in the cloud with your CDN. So all these combination and all these hybrid transformation would be not cost efficient usually, and would result in a not effective, let's say, workflow function. I would say that the key consideration, I would agree with Will here, is that you need to reduce your egress costs. So these are the fees for moving data out of the cloud. And you need a tightly integrated CDN that can often offer a lower or no egress fees for you. The example of AWS, Amazon CloudFront and AWS Cloud is is very to the point. But I think that in some cases, people do not want to be, let's say, locked into specific environments. So it's not that one solution fits all again here. So you want to understand what do you want to sacrifice, and maybe as in a different, as you found yourself in different stages of your business, let's say adventure, your needs might be different. So when you start, you might need absolutely the lowest cost for everything, as long as it works. But as you grow up, you might find that your need has changed, and you need to combine different bits and pieces from your workflow with different solutions. So then it's where these ecosystem solutions do not work for you usually. So it's just a matter of what you're willing to sacrifice, and what are your main needs when you're trying to decide on your cloud and CDN strategy, really.
Does that resonate with you, Will, at that point about the slow adoption of cloud?
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting fact about cloud is people are very much single cloud tenants right now today. Mostly you're an AWS shop or GCP shop or Azure. And if we spoke earlier about the engineering realities of getting reliability out of multi-CDN, the same is true for cloud providers. It's just harder to do today. It's not as, it's HTTP is a lovely interface where I can make one request against multiple CDNs, get the same thing back. It's not quite as easy against my cloud deployment, but we're getting there. Like Kubernetes is becoming sort of a more standardized container, and I can deploy it in many different clouds. But I think if we go 5 or 10 years into the future, there's going to be a lot of multi-cloud happening, a lot more multi-cloud happening than there is today. Today, it's complex. There's vendors who offer it, but I still don't see many primary workflows actually being multi-cloud out there.
Great. Okay. Before we go into the last couple of questions, let's have a look at audience Q&A. We had a further one from Thierry. How can AI further help CDN and clients? Anybody want to take that?
I can certainly take it.
Yep.
So, we use AI, we run security services. AI is very good at looking for anomalies, much, much better than humans are. So AI can detect malware and intrusions and spot anomalous behaviors. It's very good for that. It's also helpful for predicting load. Where do we have to deploy content? Any sort of scanning and routine task happening within a CDN, we're pretty much aggressively looking at using AI for that. It's also an interesting business opportunity for CDNs. So we've spoken about price compression and CDN content delivery becoming a commodity, right? So content delivery networks. But what if we replace the C with a compute delivery network? So we're looking at more and more edge compute coming out, and certainly Akamai has edge workers, and we have WASM coming out, and Cloudflare has edge compute, and Fastly has edge compute. And what if part of the compute, these compute delivery networks start offering, is in fact AI inference? So there's talk there that maybe the old days of just moving media segments is really not where the interest or the economics are, but what if it's about provisioning inference for AI systems at the edge? Because driving everyone to OpenAI's cluster, which I don't know where it is in the world, but it has to be fantastically huge because we're all hitting it every day. Do we see the same migration in interfacing? And are we just at the beginning of a movement to edge-based AI interactions? And if so, is that new ground for what was previously known as content delivery networks?
Got it. Okay. We've got a question from Paul Martin, it's quite a long question, so I'll read it out to here. It seems a lot of comments about private versus public and on-net versus off-net deployments are very relevant for global or at least large multinational streamers who would indeed have a lot of complexity if they had a hybrid model in many different countries, which is why we see the likes of Disney and Netflix and YouTube using a consistent private CDN platform globally. But I don't see the same point for large national streamers such as broadcasters that have a much smaller and focused ecosystem to work with. Do you see differences in business priorities between multinational versus national streamer motivations on target architectures and business models. Stelios, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, of course. I think we're talking about two buyer cases here with very different needs. When you have a very large and globally geographically distributed and dispensed audience across the world, you totally need something different from an ISP provider in Greece, let's say, where you know all your audience, and actually majority of it, 50% of it, is going to be in the capital, in Athens. So you have very different needs, and that's what's pushing you to build your own CDN. But you also have, which is very interesting, you also have the scale, and you also have the ability to go and persuade the ISP that when you put your nodes in his network, he also can win from that by diverting traffic and reducing the capacity needed on his own network and make it more reliable and functioning in a better way. So we're talking about two very different business models there, and I think it's self-evident that these people that are making the choices are going to make very different choices.
Yeah. Will, anything to add to that?
Yeah, exactly. What Stelios just said, that if you look at national language broadcasters, particularly, so it's a country, say you're in Sweden, you're SVT, public broadcaster, right? 90-something% of your audience is going to be in Sweden, and they're going to be within 20 milliseconds from you. So do you need a global CDN to serve them? No, you don't, is the answer. And I think if you look at what SVT have done, they built their own domestic CDN, because it's much easier to do it if your goal is to serve a smaller country worth of people that are all 20 milliseconds away. And then they'll start complementing that with global CDNs to carry traffic, but also to carry international traffic. So maybe 10% is going to Swedish people who are consuming content outside of the country. You certainly need your international CDN for that. But it's harder for a global CDN that has fewer POPs to deliver good in-country performance if your target audience is completely, or the majority of it is inside that country. And we see that a lot in Europe. We see that in LATAM. We see that in Asia as well. So it's definitely a different target market. We also, Paul mentioned YouTube. We're starting to see YouTube now sell its highly integrated delivery system, which means it's a CDN that YouTube operate, and it's a player that they operate. And they sell it to broadcasters. And the broadcasters, even though YouTube is a competitor to their eyeballs, YouTube offers a very compelling advertising revenue opportunity for them. So they will move some of their content over YouTube, knowing full well at the same time that YouTube is drawing eyeballs away from their content. But again, if it's national language content or it can't be obtained anywhere else, then they feel a little more comfortable doing it. So we do see a trend there of broadcasters leveraging YouTube, which is not something I would have predicted, say, 5 years ago.
And that's a very interesting point. YouTube is coming up more and more in discussions of video delivery, I think, these days. Great. Okay. To wrap up, looking at the CDN as a whole, how central do you think the CDN should be to content service providers thinking about investment in technology generally? Are there other areas where they would get a better return on their investment than thinking about CDN specific technologies? I mean, I think Will, you mentioned looking at video coding and things like that. I mean, what do you think the priority should be?
Yeah, you can't define a strict priority ladder and say CDNs are number 3 in your decision tree. Yeah. Clearly, they're not. They need to be an important part of your decision matrix. And again, I encourage people to look beyond purely the cost and look at the performance, the reliability, how you interface with them, and how they tie into your origin. Are they part of a joint compute surface? And how are you going to do multi CDN and steer between them? So you don't just, the danger is your CDN is a cloud on your PowerPoint diagram, and you see it as completely substitutable, and it doesn't matter who it is, and it's all going to be the same. And if you do that, you're going to get lowest common denominator behavior, and that's not going to be world-class or even acceptable SLA for many applications. So it's a far more complex interaction and dependency than perhaps more people want it to be. And the more CDNs you use in the mix, the more complex it becomes which one to use at the right time for which player and for which device.
Great. And Stelios?
I think I will use the Netflix example a little bit here. So did Netflix build the CDN to start its service across the globe? No. It started with other things. So you need first, in my opinion, you have to go for the content creation and acquisition. That's super important, because if you don't have good content to show to your audience, then you have no service in reality. Then you need also the data analytics. You have to understand the user behavior. You need to give them the personalized experiences, and you need to develop also a robust and intuitive user interface and application. That's crucial. So I would see CDN as an investment in a strategic enabler for all the other investment a service provider is making in his business. So if you have all the other investments, and these are all going really well, you're getting more and more audience, you have good content, you're producing, or you're buying good content at a good price. So if you have a nice application, if the quality of experience and the user interface for the end viewer is really good, there is where CDN comes and ties this all up with the quality of experience, and it's making it make sense to invest more and more in order to make this more smooth, and better in any view. So that's how I would say it. It's not about a ranking in reality, but I wouldn't say that CDN is the top priority. I think it's like it's tying everything else together.
Got it. Okay. Great. I think we can more or less wrap up there. It's been very interesting to me. I've learned quite a lot, and I hope the audience has too. If anybody wants to connect with you guys, where are you going to be next? What sort of events, and where are you going to be at? Where are you going to be present at?
I'll be in Berlin at Media Web Symposium for Fraunhofer. I think that's June 23 to 27th. We've got Dash.js meeting for those who like Dash.js. We got Media Web Symposium for 2 days, and then we got the Dash Industry Forum meeting. So if you're in Europe and you like media engineering, then certainly come on by.
Great. Stelios?
And I'll probably be at IBC in Amsterdam in September. So we're going to be the largest Caretta team at IBC so far this year. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to meet with people, discuss, and understand their needs and how they view the market and how we can help them make better decisions.
Fantastic. Okay. I'd like to thank you both, Stelios and Will, for what I think really was a very informative and stimulating discussion, and that will be available on demand on our website in the coming days. Last but not least, I'd like to thank you in the audience for joining us, and I wish you a good remainder of the day. Thanks very much, and goodbye.